Moore and Priya Sharma were the picture of perfection, a wealthy American tech mogul and his stunning Indian wife, celebrated as a symbol of love that transcended borders. But behind the gates of their luxurious New York mansion, a secret was growing, one so twisted that it would end in blood. When a DNA test revealed that Priya's unborn baby didn't belong to Ethan, but to his own father, the facade of their perfect life shattered, and what followed became one of the most shocking family murders the world had ever seen. In 2018, New York's elite social circles were captivated by the glamorous life of Ethan Moore and his Indian wife, Priya Sharma. Their relationship seemed like something out of a romantic film, a blend of cultures, wealth, and beauty that drew admiration wherever they went. Ethan, a 34-year-old tech entrepreneur, had built his fortune through a successful cybersecurity company. His charm and sharp intellect made him a frequent face at business conferences and high-profile charity events. Priya, just 28, had been a well-known model in Mumbai before she met Ethan during one of his business trips to India. Within months, their whirlwind romance led to a grand wedding held at a beachside resort in Goa, attended by celebrities, politicians, and media personalities. When Priya moved to New York after the wedding, she was instantly thrust into a world of luxury. The Moores lived in a sprawling mansion overlooking the Hudson River, filled with priceless art, glass chandeliers, and staff who attended to her every need. To the public, they appeared to have it all: love, success, and a future filled with promise. Social media posts painted the picture of a fairy tale marriage, romantic vacations, candlelit dinners, and a radiant Priya announcing her pregnancy in a designer gown. But behind the polished photos and perfect smiles, cracks had already started to form. Priya struggled to adjust to life in America, far from her family and friends. She felt isolated in a house that was beautiful yet strangely cold. Ethan, often consumed by his work, didn't notice her growing loneliness. Their differences in background and lifestyle began to surface in subtle ways. While Ethan saw his success as their shield from all problems, Priya longed for emotional connection and belonging, something money could never buy. It was the beginning of a quiet distance that neither of them fully understood yet. Richard Moore, Ethan's father, was a man who commanded both admiration and fear. A retired real estate tycoon, he had built an empire in the 1980s and carried himself like a man who owned every room he entered. Even after stepping down from business, Richard maintained an intimidating presence, sharp suits, polished speech, and an unsettling calm that made people careful around him. When Priya first met him, she was eager to make a good impression. Richard had congratulated her warmly, praising her grace and beauty. He called her the best thing that ever happened to his son. But over time, those compliments began to feel too personal, too frequent, and too intense. Richard visited their home constantly, sometimes unannounced, often when Ethan was away on business trips. He brought expensive gifts, insisted on having dinner with her, and spoke about how lonely he felt after his wife's death. At first, Priya pitied him, thinking he was simply trying to connect. But the way his eyes lingered, the way he brushed past her, the way he always found reasons to touch her hand, it made her skin crawl. She began to feel trapped in her own home, unsure how to tell Ethan without sounding ungrateful or paranoid. Ethan, on the other hand, adored his father and often dismissed Priya's discomfort as cultural misunderstanding. He believed Richard's attention came from affection and pride, not malice. Priya tried to convince herself of that too, but each encounter left her feeling smaller and more afraid. The house that once felt like a dream now began to suffocate her. Every time Richard's car pulled up the driveway, her heart raced with dread. What she didn't know was that these small moments of unease were the beginning of something far darker, a secret that would one day destroy them all. As Priya's pregnancy advanced, the emotional distance between her and Ethan grew into a quiet chasm that neither of them could bridge. Ethan, once attentive and affectionate, had become unpredictable, sometimes overprotective, sometimes entirely detached. His business empire demanded constant attention, and he often used work as an excuse to stay away from home. He claimed he was doing it to secure their child's future, but Priya could sense the unspoken resentment behind his eyes. He rarely touched her now, and their conversations had dwindled to short exchanges about schedules and appointments. Loneliness began to consume Priya's days. She would spend hours in the nursery, carefully arranging baby clothes, trying to imagine a future that still felt uncertain. The mansion was vast and quiet, filled with echoes rather than warmth. The household staff treated her politely but with a distance that reminded her she was a guest in Ethan's world, not truly part of it. The only person who seemed interested in her well-being was Richard, and that realization filled her with silent dread. She avoided being alone with him whenever possible, though he continued to find excuses to visit. Meanwhile, Ethan's mind grew increasingly clouded with suspicion. He started noticing small things: missed calls on Priya's phone, secretive smiles when she read messages from her family in India, and her reluctance to talk about Richard. His thoughts twisted those innocent moments into signs of betrayal. He began drinking late at night, pacing the marble halls, replaying imagined scenarios of deception. His paranoia deepened to the point where he hired a private investigator, claiming he only wanted to ensure everything was fine. But deep down, he was searching for something: proof of the growing unease he couldn't name, or perhaps a reason to justify the storm that was already forming inside him. By the 7th month of Priya's pregnancy, Ethan's suspicions had taken complete control of him. The investigator he hired reported nothing unusual, but Ethan refused to believe it. He was convinced that Priya was hiding something: an affair, a secret, a betrayal he couldn't yet prove. When she mentioned a prenatal checkup, he insisted they include a DNA test for medical assurance. Priya hesitated but eventually agreed, unaware of the dark intentions behind his calm tone. To her, it seemed like another one of Ethan's obsessive gestures, but to him, it was a way to confirm the truth he feared most. Weeks later, the results arrived in a sealed envelope. Ethan waited until midnight to open it, sitting alone in his dimly lit office. His hands trembled as he tore through the papers, eyes scanning each line until one phrase froze him in place. The test confirmed that he was not the biological father of the unborn child. For several seconds, he couldn't breathe. But what came next shattered him even further. The genetic markers showed a 99.9% match with his own father, Richard Moore. The baby growing inside Priya was his father's child. Ethan's body went cold as disbelief turned into pure rage. Images flooded his mind: Priya smiling at Richard, the unexpected visits, the subtle affection he had dismissed. Every moment he ignored now felt like proof of betrayal. His humiliation burned deeper than his grief. He imagined the headlines, the laughter of his competitors, the whispers of their wealthy circle. The woman he loved had carried his father's child, and the man he idolized had destroyed everything sacred to him. Ethan's reality fractured that night. What began as suspicion became certainty, and certainty gave birth to vengeance. The storm inside him finally had a target. After discovering the DNA results, Ethan's world spiraled into uncontrollable chaos. Sleep became impossible, and his once tidy office turned into a graveyard of shattered glass, torn photographs, and half-empty whiskey bottles. He avoided Priya entirely for days, locking himself away, replaying every moment of their marriage with a new, venomous perspective. The man who once prided himself on logic and control had become a stranger, consumed by rage and humiliation. When he finally looked at Priya, he no longer saw his wife, he saw the embodiment of betrayal. Priya, unaware of the test results, was frightened by his sudden hostility. He would stare at her in silence during meals, his jaw clenched, his eyes hollow. Sometimes, he would shout without reason, accusing her of things she couldn't understand. She tried to comfort him, believing his temper was caused by stress or business troubles, but her presence only fueled his anger. The mansion became a prison. Ethan started monitoring her every move, checking her messages, interrogating her about calls, even forbidding her to leave the property. When she tried to visit her doctor alone, he cancelled the appointment and claimed she no longer needed outside help. The staff noticed the tension but kept quiet. A few whispered among themselves about bruises on Priya's arm, her puffy eyes, and her trembling hands when Ethan entered the room. One maid even tried to warn her to leave, but Priya had nowhere to go. Her passport and phone had been taken away. Richard, still visiting occasionally, seemed oblivious to the destruction he had caused. He would talk to Priya as if nothing had changed, as if their secret could stay buried forever. But Ethan's silence was no longer the calm before the storm. It was the quiet of a man who had already decided what came next. The night it happened was thick with rain and thunder. Lightning flashed across the sky as wind howled through the trees surrounding the Moore estate. Inside, the mansion felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Ethan had been drinking since sunset, pacing the halls with the DNA report clenched in his hand. He muttered to himself, rage and despair twisting his mind into something unrecognizable. Priya was in the nursery, folding tiny clothes, unaware that the man she once loved had crossed a line he could never return from. At around 10 p.m., the argument began. Neighbors later told police they heard shouting, muffled at first, then violent. Priya's voice was barely audible, begging, crying, trying to calm him down. Ethan smashed a vase against the wall, shards scattering across the marble floor. His anger spilled over as he accused her of betrayal, his words slurred but venomous. When Priya tried to escape, he grabbed her arm, and in that moment of blind fury, his actions turned fatal. The struggle ended quickly. Silence filled the mansion once more, broken only by the sound of thunder. Hours passed before Ethan moved. In a haze of shock and guilt, he dragged Priya's lifeless body through the hallways, leaving a faint trail of blood behind him. Security cameras captured him pushing a tarp-covered bundle toward the greenhouse. There, under the pounding rain, he buried her shallowly among the flower beds she once tended. He returned to the house, burned her phone and belongings in the fireplace, and cleaned what he could. By dawn, he appeared eerily calm. When the staff arrived, he told them Priya had gone to visit her cousin for a few days. He even smiled, hiding beneath that calm exterior a darkness no one could yet imagine. Priya's sudden disappearance didn't go unnoticed for long. In Mumbai, her family grew increasingly anxious when her daily calls stopped. She never went more than a day without speaking to her mother, and now, days had passed in silence. Ethan's brief and mechanical responses over text saying she was resting or traveling only deepened their suspicion. Her brother finally reached out to the New York Police Department, requesting a welfare check at the Moore estate. When officers arrived, Ethan greeted them with polite calmness, insisting that Priya had left voluntarily after a disagreement. His composure, however, felt rehearsed, and detectives noted the faint smell of bleach in the house. The investigation began quietly but gained traction when Priya's doctor confirmed she had missed a critical prenatal appointment. Detectives interviewed the household staff, and inconsistencies emerged. The gardener mentioned seeing Ethan digging near the greenhouse late one stormy night, claiming he thought it was odd but didn't question it. Another maid recalled the sound of breaking glass and muffled screams days before Priya vanished. These details painted a grim picture. When investigators searched the estate, luminol testing revealed traces of blood in the garage drain and on the floor near the nursery, small, deliberate stains someone had tried to erase. Authorities soon uncovered the private investigator Ethan had hired months earlier. From him, they learned about the DNA test, the results, and Ethan's erratic behavior afterward. The motive was now clear: rage, humiliation, and revenge. Armed with a warrant, police excavated the greenhouse area. Beneath the soil, they discovered the remains of Priya and her unborn child. The tragedy was confirmed by DNA testing, which also revealed the horrifying secret Ethan had tried to bury. The story exploded across international headlines, exposing one of the most shocking scandals in recent memory. The courtroom was packed when the trial began. Journalists from both the United States and India filled the benches, their cameras flashing as Ethan Moore was led inside in handcuffs. The man once hailed as a visionary entrepreneur now appeared hollow and defeated, his sharp suits replaced by a prison uniform. The evidence against him was overwhelming: the DNA test, the surveillance footage, and the testimonies from staff members who had witnessed his violent outbursts. Prosecutors portrayed him as a man driven by pride and vengeance, unable to bear the humiliation of his wife's affair with his father. His defense team argued temporary insanity, claiming the DNA revelation had caused a mental collapse that clouded his judgment. The most shocking turn came when prosecutors revealed Richard Moore's medical records and emails, showing a disturbing pattern of manipulation and predatory behavior. It became evident that Richard had groomed Priya over time, using emotional coercion and threats to keep her silent. The court ordered a separate investigation into his conduct, but before the case could proceed, Richard suffered a massive heart attack in his penthouse and died, taking much of the truth with him. His death ignited further outrage, denying Priya's family the full justice they sought. Ethan was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. As he was led away, he remained expressionless, perhaps realizing that every trace of his once perfect life had crumbled. Priya's ashes were flown back to India, where her family held a quiet ceremony by the sea, mourning both her and the unborn child who never had a chance to live. The case became a haunting reminder that beneath the polished image of wealth and power, monstrous secrets can thrive, and that even love, when poisoned by deceit, can end in unimaginable horror.